What is the fastest you have ever seen a new coworker get fired? 4 or so hours. When I was 18, I got a job at a grocery store along with 3 others. We all started training together. On the first day, we were training in the evening and one girl asked to go home. She said her head hurt. They said fine. She clocked out, went to grab a grocery cart and started filling it with beer and liquor. The store manager walked over and asked her if she was having a party. She said yes. Didn't even try to come up with an excuse. Just, yeah, I am, so I needed to leave early on my first day, basically. He fired her. Well, given the stuff that she was buying, I think her excuse was a little bit too early. Story 2. He didn't show up the first day, second day, or third day. I had to work a double shift for 3 days straight. Not fun. I answered the phone when he finally called in on the 4th day. He said, I'm going to be honest with you. I've been in Orlando. My parents paid for a small vacation as a reward for getting the job. Would it be okay to start next week instead of this week? Story 3. Before their first day on orientation, I got hired for a manufacturing job through Manpower, a temp agency. Me and a friend of my wife were both supposed to start on Monday at the plant for a week-long orientation. She got into a fender bender on her way to orientation and called them to say that she'd be a bit late, that she needed to wait on the police to give a statement. The manager told her not to bother ever coming in. Girl was torn up. She took pictures and the police report in to the hiring manager, tried to explain things to the company HR managers, but no dice. She was fired before ever clocking in. Story 4. This was a while ago at my old job. A new guy gets hired as a busboy. He was super annoying and tried to insert himself into everyone's conversation, whether they wanted him there or not. It only took a couple of hours for the whole restaurant to hate him. I was working the bar and he kept eating the bar fruit. I personally didn't care, but the manager did. The manager comes over and tells him to stop eating the fruit. He looks the manager in the eye and eats another piece of fruit. The manager says, "Really?" Followed by, "Come with me to the office." The new guy promptly replies with, "All right, man, calm down. I can tell you got that big D energy for a good reason." Followed with a cliche wink and a nudge from his elbow in front of me and like 4 other employees. I wanted to slam my face into the ice bin. It was just so cringy to witness. He promptly walked out the front door 10 minutes later without his uniform on anymore. The worst thing about it was the manager was an insanely laid-back guy. Hell, the whole restaurant was insanely laid back. You really had to try hard to get fired from this place. Had he not thrown in that big D line, I'm almost positive he would have just gotten a slap on the wrist and kept the job. Story 5. I used to do a lot of field work on site investigation programs. Basically, we'd hang out on a drill rig while the drillers took rock cores. We'd log the cores, take photos, do some downhole tests, etc. A new engineer gets sent to site and gets assigned the night shift. Some people love night shift, but most people don't, hence sticking the junior with night shift. After 5 nights, he calls the office and says he wants to come home because he's freezing and he hates it and he can't do it. Not clear to me if he quit or got fired, but it became plain pretty quickly that this job was not for him. I got pulled onto that program and I asked the drillers what the guy's deal was. They had a propane heater in the back of their van, and despite repeated invitations to sit in the back of the van, Buddy just sat in his truck all night and shivered in the middle of February. Story 6. I spent my summers in college working as a laborer for a construction company. Anyway, we were doing a bunch of renovations in an active hospital, so noise and dust were a huge concern. We were a small crew and just starting renovations on an area with a super tight schedule, so the company hired a subcontractor for some of the work. Enter these 2 clowns who show up to do some demolition work. The foreman talks about how they may be used to doing things a certain way, but this is an active hospital, so he'd rather the work take longer than for them to make a huge mess or a lot of noise. An hour later, we apparently got multiple complaints about the noise and the mess, so the foreman calls me up and says to go over there and clean up now, and that he'd be by shortly to see what the hell was going on. These dudes had dust and broken walls everywhere. I could hear them halfway down the hall just smashing away without a care in the world. The foreman shows up and we walk into the room to witness this dude standing on a pile of rubble swinging a sledgehammer over his head at a brick wall that he's removed the bottom from. Somehow the rest of this wall is still hanging from the ceiling. I have no idea how. The guy wasn't even wearing a hard hat, apparently oblivious that any moment that wall might give way and crush him. The foreman lost his mind on these guys, kicked them out immediately, and got on the phone with their company and told them he didn't want to see these guys on site again. Lots of choice 4-letter words were used, even threatening to fire the subcontractor entirely and get someone else to do the work. Story 7. I got hired as a long-term temp with one other person to do some basic data entry work at a major brand pretty much everyone has heard of. And it was at their corporate headquarters, so pretty prestigious. Anyway, we went through all of this onboarding stuff in the morning that required us to get photo IDs and figure out parking and all that stuff. Then after 2 or 3 hours, we were introduced to one of the employees in our new department who began going over what we were going to be doing. None of it seemed overly difficult, and I figured that while it was a new system I had never used before, I'd be able to work it out in a few days, as long as I asked questions and took notes. And that was a thing that made me realize that the other person who got hired with me probably lied on her resume and was completely out of her depth. She didn't take any notes and didn't ask any questions, and whenever I glanced at her, I could see flashes of panic on her face. Well, lunchtime came, and when we came back, she said that another company had called her and offered her a permanent position and she couldn't work with us anymore. Both me and the person training us knew what was going on, but I'll give the other lady credit for finding a way out without losing face too badly. The takeaway here is, yes, fake it until you make it can and does work, but you gotta be able to fake it. You can't fake faking it. Story 8. My sister was fired on day 1. My dad had his own small medical practice and would hire me and my sisters as our first job to be his receptionist and file insurance claims so we could get some workplace experience before we went job hunting in the larger world. My oldest sister worked for him in high school for a year, I worked for him for 2 years, and then it came time for my younger sister to take over. I brought her to work to start training and said the number one rule in the office was, at work, he's not dad, he's the doctor and the boss. She sassed him in front of a patient her first day with all the venom and sarcasm a teenage girl can muster when dealing with a parent asking her to do something. He fired her on the spot and I had to drag her out of there. Mom told her at least she'd got paid for the couple of hours she managed to be employed. Story 9. We had a new guy come in, go through all of the training on starting in our factory, lock out, tag out, and all that stuff. Said he was an electrician. Then the very first job he was asked to do, he was found working on a machine with the power locked on. There's so many things wrong with that in an industrial setting, it's unbelievable. My boss pulled him out of the machine and said, "You're too stupid to work here," and walked him out of the building. I think he was an actual employee there for 3 days at that point, and this was his first day actually on the production floor and not in training. Bonus story because I apparently can't read. We had a guy go through the interview process, come in for his first day, take a tour of the plant, and go to his car and go home. It was a lime, no, not the fruit processing plant, 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit, 1,400 degrees Celsius kilns that turn limestone into activated lime. The whole place is filthy dirty all the time. Everything about that job sucked. I made it 4 months before the poor management and poor working conditions outweighed the pay. I am not surprised we had so many people quit within the first couple of days or weeks of employment there, but this one guy was the fastest. Story 10. My document processing clerk was getting married and going on his honeymoon, so I got a short-term temp. It wasn't a temp to hire. Everything was out in the open through a legit temp agency who generally did pretty good screening. The temp's very first day, they show up with a box of things, photos, mugs, office equipment, pen cup, task light, etc. Stuff to decorate a cubicle with. I advised them not to unpack, we were getting right into training. Within 2 hours after I cut them loose on a computer with a "let me know if you need anything or have any questions," they said, "This mouse is hurting my wrist. It gave me carpal tunnel. I'm going to need workers' comp paperwork." I made an immediate call to the agency ending this contract, then told the temp, "Your paperwork is at the temp agency office. Go ahead and go see your rep there." They left their box of stuff behind. I had to have the temp agency come pick it up. Story 11. I worked in a restaurant for my very first job in high school. I was about 16 when we hired on my coworkers/buddy's little cousin. This kid was a year younger than me and a total idiot. No one liked him because of his attitude and behavior issues. Anyway, the kid gets hired and at first he's chill. Him and I both love the same band. So we had a mutual bond and a common thing to talk about. Other than that, I couldn't stand him much. But during his first week, he starts to step on people's toes quite easily because he notices some of us who are friends like roasting each other, and he thought he could join in. But the comments he was making weren't silly banter, it was full-blown, rude comments that made some of us mad and get selective over when we'd joke back and forth with each other. We also started to notice this kid didn't do his job properly either. He worked dish pit when working alone, and his lack of proper cleaning of dishes, cutlery, and so on threw everyone behind on their closing tasks, because we'd have to ask him to rewash everything due to food chunks being all over things. After 2 or 3 weeks, a number of us complained to management. This kid's older cousin even complained about him. It got so bad. The last straw, I think, for him was taking this dishwasher sprayer and started to spray people as they walked into the kitchen. He got screamed at by a number of us and was fired a few days later when it was brought to management and they noticed how angry all of us were with this kid. Story 12. I owned a construction business and we recently hired 3 new employees due to expansion. I didn't get to meet them yet as my business partner was the one who interviewed them and watched them get started on the first day and would check in on them most mornings. Along with the new hires, we promoted one of our best workers to manager to oversee them. So after a few days, I noticed that we were behind schedule on the job. This wasn't all that surprising because we had the new hires, but I decided it's best to go in and check it out to make sure everything was going well. So I call up my manager and tell him to go to a different site. We did multiple sites each day, and that I will take over at the place with the new guys. I arrive at the site half an hour late due to traffic, and everyone is already hard at work, and in fact, they are working efficiently and correctly on everything. I asked them a few questions about what they were doing and so on and get all the right answers. I figured the delay was just the first 2 days of learning, and I'm very pleased that everything was picking up and seemingly going very well. Now, it is important that at this point I didn't actually introduce myself and nobody asked who I was, so it seems everyone just assumed that I was just another worker from the company they never met before. So 2 hours before we are supposed to finish for the day, a guy comes over and says, "Hey, just so you know, we're all gonna head out now, but clock in that we worked the whole day." Manager allows it and the owners never notice. So that is the story of how I fired 3 new hires on the first day that I met them, and also how I had to fire our best worker. Story 13. Where to begin? One person didn't show up for the second day, citing culture shock, and then spent at least an hour each day complaining about everything to HR. They were gone inside of a month. Some other bloke refused to follow processes and called his manager an irrelevant woman in team meetings. Gone within a week. My quote-unquote favorite was technically a new coworker from my perspective only, as I'd only just become aware of their existence. They interpreted, quote, "We're going to retire that server from production," as "we're going to throw the hardware off of the roof into a skip," and proceeded to head down to the data center, power the thing off in the middle of the day, drive to his friend's office, plug the box in, and deploy a bunch of IVR scripts he derived from our proprietary scripts, so they could run a bunch of psychic and intimate hotlines. He was gone within 10 minutes of getting that server back. Story 14. This dude showed up to run food at the restaurant I work at, and he never read the ticket and didn't make any salads. He dropped a platter of food, spent 70% of his time standing around doing nothing. He was the slowest dishwasher ever. He took a water break every 2 minutes. My friend and I tried to get him to leave, but he body slammed the door so hard the airbag sensor got disconnected. He ate the food my coworker made for me and then stood around and laughed when I got angry. He's 6'4", by the way, also 14. Anyway, my friend told him to leave because he just wasn't doing anything productive, and he shouldn't get paid for wasting space. He cried and then never came back. I felt bad, but not really. Story 15. A day. She was a high school student, still in training, and the boss basically mistreated her. He didn't give her a break during her first shift, was constantly looking over her shoulder and criticizing everything. Too big, too small, too curved, too straight. And that wears on a 15-year-old. She was not allowed to sit down, use the bathroom, or eat. At the end of the day, she had blisters all over her hands from working unprotected in 2 degrees Celsius, 36 degrees Fahrenheit with metal equipment. She was nearly crying when her boss scolded her for putting the whipped cream on the side per customer's request instead of on top. She got fired when she arrived the day after for being quote-unquote late. She was an hour early. She was sad, but also glad that she didn't have to work in that ice cream parlor anymore. Her hands took a week to heal. Story 16. Shortest ever was less than half hour, including the HR disciplinary. The guy arrived to start his first day in a fairly senior position. Part of the onboarding process is the medical check, usually just eyesight, hearing, sugar, and pressure. The nurse does his heart rate and it's racing, pressure was all over the place, and speech starts getting more slurred the longer he sits. The nurse asks him outright what he took. Apparently he was nervous, so he decided to smoke a huge to calm his nerves. HR came past and withdrew the offer of employment, and he was out the door before 8:30. Tossed away a great job for a Story 17. Backstory: I met a dude through another dude, and he and his pregnant girlfriend had nowhere to go. I had an insane amount of acreage, and I felt bad for the guy, so I let him stay in his RV on my land, and I even hooked him up to running water and electricity, all of which I paid for. He had a part-time job delivering furniture and never made enough to pay me the paltry $100 he promised to pay me every month for helping them out. When I'd confront him, he'd tell me he just never worked enough hours to provide for his girlfriend and pay me. I mean, I'm sure the copious plumes of smoke coming from his RV, which was tiny and contained his pregnant GF, didn't help matters. I do it too. This isn't a judgment on toking, but a judgment on not paying your rent before smoking. So proactively, I got him a job at the hardware store I was assistant manager at until I finished my degree. This was 11 years ago. Came to work, and after 2 hours on his first day, just left, walked out, went back to the RV, which was parked next to my house. I never said anything and never returned. Told me it was a BS job that was beneath him. It seriously ruined my reputation at that store, and luckily that wasn't my career path or anything. Story 18. This happened last week. A new girl is hired and right off the bat starts telling me that she regrets taking this job, despite being unemployed for 4 months, because there are so many new people, so it must be a bad job because of high turnover. Not really true. We just got bought by a large company and they are hiring more people because we have more business. She tells us all about it, how it's her birthday and she's going drinking after work. Does a no-call, no-show the next day, which is her third day. We all assume she quit, but the next day she comes in and starts just trying to work like nothing happened. The supervisor asked what happened and she said she got in a minor car accident. He asked why she didn't call and she said she doesn't have a cell phone, despite being on her cell phone constantly in the office. He decided to give her one more chance, but gave her a lecture about how she needs to communicate properly about missing work, and one more incident will be an automatic firing. Next day, no call, no show. Story 19. As an early 20-something, I was a pizza delivery driver. This one girl had it out for me. She was a kiss bum to the manager and saw to it that I got fired. I got another job at another pizza place where I was on great terms with the manager. I came in after a day off and he told me that he had hired some girl. When he gave me her name, I said that was the person that got me fired from my last job. He told me to send her into his office when she showed up. She came in and recognized me as I told her the boss wanted to go see her. She walked out of his office in a huff a minute or so later. She never even got to clock in. Story 20. I had a guy walk out before lunch. We didn't do anything to scare him off. All of a sudden, like 2.5 hours into the shift, he was just like, I gotta go, man. And when we asked what was wrong, he just ignored us and said, I just gotta go. I called my boss, she called HR, and I never heard what the story was, but it was super weird. Another odd story about a year ago from the case where the company sucked. I worked for a document sorting and security company. They'd scan your hard copy files and stuff. I was just a temp hired for this big project, hiring a lot of folks. Then one day, like 2 days before Halloween, they go, yeah, so we don't know when the project will get here, so we don't need you all, so just don't come back unless we call you. One guy who was probably like 20 had started the day before, and this trash pile company just laid us all off. When they called me after Thanksgiving to come back, I just lied and said I had a new job. Screw that place. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 21. We got a new contract for 2 receptionists to sit at our front desk. The company did not send their sharpest knives in the drawer because it was a low-dollar contract for only 1 year. You could consider the positions temporary. They sent a guy that my security manager called Sticks. He was incredibly malnourished and thin. We had a front door that was double-pane glass. I always exited through the side door and would look in through the glass doors every day when I left for home. On Sticks, the second day, I looked in through the glass at the dark reception area and saw one of the office chairs behind the reception counter as it slowly spun. I entered back in through the side door and came into the back of the reception. I found Sticks laying on the floor with an ergonomic office chair that had fallen on top of him. His head was bleeding from where he struck the floor or some other object. Also, in my peripheral vision, I saw a can of compressed air, the type for cleaning keyboards. Sticks said he was perfectly fine. I helped him up and sent him home. Over the next few days, other admin folks reported to me that they kept finding Sticks collapsed in the reception area when no one had been around. I finally called his corporate supervisor to come take him away. When the supervisor arrived, Sticks had locked himself in the supply closet and refused to talk to me. I could hear him huffing air behind the door. The supervisor talked to him through the door and finally escorted him back to company headquarters. They fired him. I called the company and I learned that Sticks was a former service member who had served in combat. Looking at his resume, I knew he was also a former EOD team member. I suspected he had substance misuse problems stemming from PTSD and head trauma. I still had his contact information, so I contacted him a week later. From then on, I coached him every day until I finally got him an appointment with a volunteer from AMVETS who got him and his family helping care. Today, I wish I knew where he was. This was more than 5 years ago. I hope that he took advantage of the help offered to him. Because of this thread, I am going to text him right now and see how he's doing. Story 22. 1.5 hours into a shift as an animal care worker, I was showing my trainee how to clean the kitten rooms and started him on the easiest cage. We're talking neonatal, 6-day-old bottle feeder kittens. I explained how to set up the kennel, clean them up, etc. I turned around to grab some towels and a fresh hot water bottle when I heard a thump, and then another thump. I turned around and he was tossing the kittens to the other side of the kennel to move them. Like underhand lobbing a softball, just tossed 3 kittens out of his way. I freaked out and yanked his butt down to the supervisor's office. His excuse was the kittens were attacking him and he felt threatened, so he threw them? No warnings, fired on the spot. The kittens all were fine and got adopted out a few months later. Story 23. Here's one where the new hire tried his best. He's about 80, really kind, slender, tall, and a retired drill sergeant. He could and would do a perfect Morgan Freeman impression. His impression of Hope Colburn telling Miss Daisy he's not going to hold it is genius level. The position he was hired for was medical courier, physically easy, but sometimes you have to hustle a little. Let's call him Hoke, okay? So, Hoke, he had impeccable manners, would greet pretty much everyone he passed by. Too often, this would lead to a conversation, a long conversation. The boss, a young USAF veteran, really tried to make it work, but the labs have to get delivered on time. Also, Hoke just never got the hang of using a smartphone. Sadly, the final straw was he lost his driver's license. He hit multiple cars at a megamart, not on the job, in his personal car, a 1974 Lincoln that he bought new. His wife called the police, and apparently there's a law that says an officer can suspend someone's license, and then you have to retake the behind-the-wheel driving test. But he was fired before he could retake the test. I really miss that old man. Story 24. It's my first day after my 2-day weekend, food service, so days off vary from person to person. A guy comes in, I've never seen him before, but by his direction and my coworkers' reactions, I can tell he's a new employee. He's smelling of alcohol. He grabs some food without putting in an order for it, right in front of everyone, including one manager. He asks one of the servers where the takeout silverware is. The server redirects him to me, the host, since takeout stuff is part of my duties, not the server's. I show him the silverware, he starts grumbling, and then returns to the server and gets on their case about why the hell didn't they tell him where it is. This escalates to a fight that culminates in him getting tackled to the floor by the manager and the cops being called. Turns out this wasn't the first time he's shown that kind of behavior. The day before, he mouthed off at the general manager after she instructed him to take out the trash, insisting that it wasn't part of his job. It was. He later said that he didn't know she was the GM despite her shiny, golden, as opposed to the normal white name tag with General Manager written on it. We never saw him again after the fight. He'd only been there like 2 or 3 days at most and was still in training for the position he was hired for. Story 25. I worked in the signage industry for many years. One day, some guy walks in looking for work, claiming to be a sign writer. My boss asks him if he has brushes. He says absolutely. So my boss says, okay, we need someone to go and paint a 5-meter logo on the wall at the gym. It's basically a couple of circles with Helvetica text in between and a stylized dancing man. Pretty basic stuff. We give him the layout and the paint and off the guy goes. 4 or 5 hours later, we get a call from the owner of the gym. He tells my boss to come and fetch this guy before he has some kind of breakdown inside the gym. We get there, and he has literally got 2 tiny little artist's brushes, a number 1 and a number 4 or something, and he's trying to freehand this frickin' 5-meter circle with them. I almost cracked a rib trying not to laugh at this guy. He was sweating bullets trying to get this done. No mall stick, no tape, no chalk line, not even a normal 2-inch paintbrush. Just this little freaking 4mm round paintbrush, and he's painting this 50mm thick circle by eye. Holy crap, we laughed about that one for days. Story 26. We hired through a temp agency with little background checks. I pretty much got a guy fired within 3 days. I am the only female on the shop floor, and at the time, the youngest team member by around 15 or 20 years. At the time, I was 19, and this guy, who was 40, had just started. I instantly got a bad feeling when he would just stop not staring at me. Several coworkers mentioned it to me, as well as asking personal questions within 10 minutes of meeting me. Anyway, I could not get over this creepy vibe no matter what, and it didn't help that the guy kept screaming about conspiracy theories. Did you know there is apparently an ice wall surrounding the flat earth and there are special guards with lasers that will fire on site? Like what? Anyway, I had mentioned it to both my manager and my coworkers that he absolutely terrified me with the vibes he was giving off. They agreed to keep an eye on me. We are a small team in a very old, large building with a lot of hiding spaces, and we are expected to do a lot of our work on an individual basis. By the second day, the guy waited till we were alone and started saying, "You're not like other girls, you're so nice and perfect and you would make an amazing wife," in a very creepy tone. Cut to a few hours later, the guy is shouting about how his current girlfriend is useless and a witch and how much he hates her to the rest of the team on break. By the third day, the guy starts screaming about his conspiracy theories again on break, but starts acting aggressive towards those who question him. After break, another supervisor asks why I'm laughing, and I quote what the guy said. Long story short, the guy lasted another 3 hours before he told us he would not be coming back the next day. Turns out the guy had also gone into the main offices and tried to convert people towards his branch of religion, and he would not stop the subject when asked by several staff members. Story 27. Call center job, escalated customer service for a cell phone company. Initial new employee training. After the initial new hire paperwork was done, we were shown some of the various tasks we would be doing. One task involved customer bill complaints that if a customer was being misbilled, then we would need to correct her bill. They gave an example of the biggest case that had ever hit the call center. Lufthansa, the German airline, apparently was exempt from certain taxes on their American cell phone accounts, due to some treaty or something, but that hadn't been implemented in our billing, so someone had to go through every account in their name and every bill, going all the way back to the creation of those accounts, and credit off tens of thousands of dollars worth of taxes. This middle-aged guy who had already established himself to be snarky and bitter and sarcastic makes some quip about, "Oh great, our job is to give money back to the dictators." The instructor spins around, stares straight at him, and asks him to repeat what he said. He sheepishly said it was nothing and he didn't say anything of note. The instructor just glared at him. For context, the instructor was a woman in some kind of conservative Islamic dress. I don't know the proper term for it, but it wasn't one of those full burqas. She was clearly very uptight and formal and proper. She didn't like joking or cutting up in class, insisted on being addressed as Mrs. Mohammed instead of her first name, and was generally pretty stern. We went on a scheduled break about a half hour later. When he was walking back from the break room, he was intercepted by a security guard and someone that I would later learn was the general manager of the whole site, and they took him to a side meeting room while the rest of us were filing into the training room. The guy was never seen again. He worked for the company all of about 3 hours. Story 28. Sometime around 2003, I was on a business trip and at the hotel the night before preparing for a client presentation. 7 of us were present. That included me and a new sales director named Paul. We are projecting the slide deck onto the wall using Paul's laptop. Paul has to take another call, so he leaves and we continue. Someone wants to add a slide with some of our company's background, so we open up a browser window to go to our company site, and of course, corn opens up. The lady driving the laptop frantically tries to close the window, but that just spawns 2 or 3 new windows with new corn. She tried to stay ahead of it for like 10 seconds before just unplugging the laptop from the projector. Clear silence for a few seconds. After the shock wears off, one of the women, 60-ish-year-old lady, stammers out, "I've never seen anything like that my entire life." I'm the only guy in the room at the time, and I'm getting strong "men are pigs" vibes from everyone else, so I don't say anything and try to look as small as possible. Later, Paul rejoins us, not knowing what had transpired. The most senior person in the room, a VP, asks everyone to step out and give her a minute to speak with Paul. We come back like 30 minutes later. Paul is understandably paler than he was earlier. No one mentions the corn, and we continue with prep and the presentation the following day, using someone else's laptop for the actual client meeting. The following week, each of us are asked to HR to provide our summary. Paul sends out an apology email saying his son must have gotten on his computer. Anyway, Paul resigned before the end of the week, and that was less than a month after he started. Sorry, Paul, the corn really wasn't that bad, but you can't do that crap on a work laptop. Story 29. Me, about 1 hour and 10 minutes. I took a job in sales for a company that hosted and ran various industry seminars. I was told in the interview all leads were pre-qualified and there'd be 0 cold calling. He pointed out this bell that everyone rang when they got a sale. My interview was 3 hours long and I didn't hear the thing once. First major red flag. Stupid me took the job. First day, first 9 a.m. orientation meeting, a guy starts going through expectations. He said we needed to show up to work every day with 20 leads of our own, asking friends, calling old coworkers, anyone by any means. Second major red flag. Then he started teaching how to use Google to dig for leads, to cold call, and literally described how to open a browser, find the URL bar, enter search phrases like, "The new hires were complete effing morons." Third major red flag. After an hour, we took a break. I found the guy who hired me and asked, "What gives?" And he said, "I never said that to you," about the no cold calling and pre-qualified leads. I grabbed my coat and went home. Story 30. I was doing a job in the Middle East. It was for a major port there. We had a new kid show up the previous day from the US. I think he was relatively fresh from college. Around 1 a.m. local time, I got a call from the IT department to track down this kid's PC because Crap for Brains was torrenting from his work computer using the company VPN. This has all kinds of insanely bad ideas, from risking access to our servers to straight up getting flogged by the local government. So I wake the kid up by banging on his door, walked over to his laptop, yanked it from the wall, and pulled the battery. "What the crap? I'll let you know in the morning," and I took his stuff back to my room and went to sleep. At the AM, I was told to drive him immediately to the airport. He was fired. Story 31. I took a temp job for a 2-week period where I literally saw hundreds of these. The contract, I later found out, was a quote-unquote telemarketing company run by a shady frickin' lawyer that found a technically legal way to commit fraud and was exploiting it as fast as it could to make back before the loophole got closed. This meant it was exceedingly easy for a new hire to say something which would constitute actual fraud completely by accident. How easy could that be? One use of the word "we" on a phone call was instant cause for dismissal. I showed up on the first day with around 30 other people. They brought us into a conference room and we were told we were all hired and would start the work that day, but that more than 2/3 of us would be fired that day. 15 minutes to practice the extremely short script, a 45-minute lecture on the things you must never ever say while closing, and 30 minutes to practice our closing, and we were on the phones. He undersold it. 3/4 were fired easy, same as the next day and every day thereafter. Story 32. I worked at a swimming pool store in college. Part of the job was to bring the chemicals, filter sand, pool salt, etc. out to the customer's vehicle. The sandbags were like 50 pounds, 22.6 kilograms. The salt bags were like 40 pounds, 18.1 kilograms. We needed another set of hands to help out around the store. There were some not-so-physical aspects to the job, but our preference was to have someone who can handle both the retail duties and the warehouse duties. So my boss let the recruiter know that we had a preference for anyone, male or female obviously, who could handle a little heavy lifting. They found us a match and ensured that she could handle all the responsibilities that we wanted. The next day, the new worker who walks through the door is about 5'5" and 110 pounds, maybe 115, soaking wet, and she was wearing fuzzy slippers. We work in a warehouse of heavy objects. I'm not one to judge off appearances alone, but I was skeptical. Either way, I showed her around the warehouse. When a customer comes in to get some salt for their pool, I put her to the test and asked if she could load up 2 bags and bring it out to the car. After 3 minutes of what should have been 30 seconds work, I walked out into the warehouse and she was struggling to even get the bag off the ground. She was gone 30 minutes later after a total of an hour and a half of work, and my boss told us she was the one who said that the heavy lifting was no problem. Story 33. I helped run a writing center in a university in the US. A student worker gets hired, comes to orientation, starts training to be face-to-face writing consultant. During the whole hiring process, we emphasize that we worked with a lot of different kinds of people and with a lot of international students from all over the world. She nods, smiles, says all the right things. We hire her. Day 1, she shadows my coworker on a face-to-face consultation with an international student from Saudi Arabia, a really friendly woman getting a master's degree in electrical engineering who wore a face covering in mixed gender settings. After the consultation, we do the normal debrief with the new hire, and she says, "Those people just make me so uncomfortable. Can we make it so I don't have to work with people like that?" "Yep, we sure can. Bye." Story 34. I started a few weeks before this one girl, so we were both doing side-by-side training with other employees. On her first day, she kept getting up to take a personal call. She'd come back, slam sit in her chair and huff, then go back to training. When lunchtime came, I went out the front and found her screaming into her phone, making wild gestures and cussing. Not only was this witnessed by anyone going in or out of the building, but the office for our HR director was literally right there next to the door. With big huge windows pointing right out into the sidewalk, this girl was doing some weird rage dance on. She didn't come back after lunch, and I heard the next day that a ton of people, like me, saw her and others heard from her within the building, so she was let go. Story 35. I was in IT and processed his account creation during a night shift. The next week I had an evening shift and he got his credentials. Then he proceeded to get into our faces because not all accesses he needed were granted yet. This was out of our hands as his manager needed to approve them. Then he decided to loop in our bosses' bosses, and the board of the company, with all the fury of a middle manager scorned. The next day I processed his account removal. Normally they gave a 2-week grace period until the account was completely deleted. They fast-tracked his account deletion. Time active in our system, less than 24 hours. Story 36. 2 weeks, we'll call her L. She was the first person I hired in my first management job. Her resume looked good and the interview went well, so she was hired on the spot. She seemed to pick things up quickly. Then she asks for shorter shifts because her cat went missing, and she wanted more time to look for it. No problem, but now she's only working 20 hours. Then the owners start complaining about her. One said she was very rude to a friend of his and said she constantly seemed in a daze, needed to be reminded of how to do basic tasks, and that she smelled. He thought she was going through withdrawals when he found her crying and shaking in our office area. The other said she was essentially useless during busy times and would stand around instead of finding ways to help. Schedule time comes and main boss man says just to leave her off and to not bother talking to her since she was beyond help. She was rightfully angry but then got mad at me for not giving her hours when she was the one who asked to be scheduled less. Main boss man told her he didn't know why she wasn't scheduled even though he was the one to make that call, so I had to cover for him. It was a cluster crap of a job that I quit back in July. I should have seen major red flags when boss man threw me under the bus and lied to this girl about her job performance. Story 37. 2 hours into their first shift, I was managing the front end of a local grocery store at the time. A guy around 40 is hired on. From the moment I meet him, I could tell he was a real winner. I pair him up with a trainer to learn the register and go back to doing the morning bookkeeping. I go to check on them about an hour and a half later, and I see him pocket a 20 from the register when the trainer's back was turned. I went to the store office, pull up the security footage, and show the store manager. We called him to the office, get the 20 back from him, and fire him on the spot. He made the local paper a week later after he got busted for cooking substances while in Walmart. And if any of these stories got to you too, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.